boyfriend's family spent the entire weekend trying to figure out if I was good enough for him. They had no idea I was the one deciding if they were good enough for me. My name is Simone. Wait, I need to back up. My name is Adele. Adele Marsh. I'm 31 years old and I'm a senior data scientist at a fintech company in Austin, Texas called Meridian Analytics. I manage risk modeling for portfolios worth more than $200 million. My team of 7 reports to me. I have a parking spot with my name on it, a salary that makes my college self want to cry with relief, and a beat-up 2015 Honda Civic I refuse to replace because I genuinely like it. My boyfriend, I'll call him Owen, has been together with me for 8 months. He's 34, works in commercial real estate, funny in a quiet way, the kind of man who notices when you've had a hard day before you've said a word. I loved that about him from the start. Still do. What Owen never mentioned until month 4 was that his family comes from old money. Not tech boom new money, not lottery money. Old Texas oil money, the kind that has been sitting in trust funds and cattle ranches and downtown properties since before either of our grandparents were born. His mother grew up in Highland Park. His father went to SMU on a legacy admission. Their house in Westlake, because of course it's in Westlake, has a wine cellar and a guest cottage and a yard that gets professionally landscaped every 2 weeks. Owen told me like he was confessing something. We were sitting on my apartment floor eating takeout pad thai, and he just said, casually, I should probably mention my family has money. I remember laughing and saying, okay. He looked relieved. I didn't understand why until later. He'd grown up being used as a measuring stick. Every girlfriend evaluated, every career choice weighed, every decision run through the filter of how it would look at the club or at church or at whatever charity luncheon his mother was chairing that season. Owen had escaped some of it by moving to Austin for work, but the pull of it never fully let go. I could see it in the way his voice changed when his mother called. That slight tightening, that careful choosing of words. When he finally asked me to come to Westlake for a long weekend, he framed it gently. My mom is a lot, he said. Just be yourself. Don't let her get to you. I squeezed his hand and told him I wouldn't, and I meant it. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet little question was forming. I knew Owen's mother, his father, and his younger sister would all be there. I knew they knew almost nothing about me beyond that I worked in tech and lived in a 1-bedroom apartment near South Congress. Owen hadn't elaborated. I hadn't pushed him to. And now I found myself wondering, what would they do with that information? What would they do with me? The week before the trip, I stood in my closet for a long time. I had work clothes, structured blazers, tailored trousers, the kind of outfits that signal you belong in rooms where decisions get made. I also had my real clothes. Worn jeans, a faded UT Austin hoodie, the old canvas sneakers I'd had since grad school, the left one still faintly stained with blue ink from a leaking pen. I put on the jeans and the sneakers. It wasn't a performance exactly. It was more like a question I wanted answered. Owen loved me in my real clothes, in my real apartment, eating pad thai on the floor. Would the people who shaped him see something worth seeing? Or would they see the canvas sneakers and stop looking? I grew up in Lubbock. My dad drove an 18-wheeler for 22 years. My mom worked the front desk at a pediatric clinic and took community college classes 2 nights a week for 6 years until she got her associate's degree, which she hung in the kitchen next to a photo of my grandmother. We weren't poor, but we were the kind of family where a car repair was a crisis and a vacation meant driving to the state park 3 hours away and sleeping in a tent. I got a full scholarship to UT on merit. I worked 20 hours a week through undergrad. I got my master's on a research fellowship. I built everything I have, one careful, deliberate step at a time. I don't say this to be impressive. I say it because the way I was raised is still the truest thing about me. My mother used to tell me, "Baby, you can always tell who a person is by how they treat someone they think can't do anything for them." I've been running that test on people ever since, usually without them knowing. The drive to Westlake took about 20 minutes from my place. Owen was quiet in the car, hands steady on the wheel, but I could see the small muscle in his jaw working. "They're going to love you," he said once, like he was trying to convince himself. It's okay either way, I said. He glanced at me. You seem very calm. I am calm, I said, and I was. The house was exactly what I'd expected, which is to say it was beautiful in a way that felt slightly aggressive. A long, paved driveway. Live oaks that had been growing since before I was born. A wraparound porch with rocking chairs that I was certain no one ever actually sat in. Owen's mother was standing at the front door when we pulled up, which told me she had been watching for our car. She was slim, probably late 50s, with silver-streaked hair cut into a neat bob and the kind of posture you can only get from years of being told to stand up straight. She was dressed beautifully, cream linen, simple gold earrings, espadrilles. Her eyes went to me first, then to my sneakers, then back up to my face. The whole thing took maybe 2 seconds, but I caught it. You must be Adele, she said, and her smile was warm and practiced in equal measure. We've heard so much. I smiled back. All good things, I hope. Of course, she said, which told me nothing. Owen's father came out a moment later. Tall, handsome in an old-fashioned way. The kind of man whose firm handshake probably had its own reputation. His name was Hugh, and he looked me over with a polite assessment of someone who does it professionally. Owen tells us you're in technology, he said. Data science, I said. Finance sector. Interesting, he said in the tone people use when they mean the opposite. Owen's younger sister Margot was easier. Genuinely warm, 26, studying for her bar exam, with her mother's eyes and her father's directness, softened by something all her own. She hugged me before I expected it, which I liked. The house smelled like fresh flowers and lemon polish and something baking. A housekeeper moved quietly through the rooms. The kitchen alone was bigger than my entire apartment. I noticed things. The art on the walls, the books arranged by color on the shelves, which told me they were decorative. The refrigerator that had its own column of water and ice options I didn't fully understand. I didn't feel small. I felt curious. Lunch was on the back patio, overlooking a pool and a garden that extended into a stand of cedar trees. Owen's mother, she asked me to call her Vera, orchestrated the meal with the efficiency of someone who had hosted 1,000 of them. She was pleasant to me, genuinely pleasant. But there was something underneath it. A kind of measurement happening, quiet and constant, like a slow drip. It started with the neighborhood. Vera mentioned casually that a house 2 streets over had just sold for $4 million. Real estate in this area has been extraordinary, she said, looking at me. Do you own or rent, Adele? I rent, I said. I like the flexibility. A small pause. Of course. Austin's rental market is very vibrant. Then it moved to cars. Owen's father mentioned that they'd just leased a new vehicle for Margot, something German, and wasn't it remarkable what cars cost these days? He looked at me with that polite, probing look. What do you drive? A 2015 Civic, I said. Another small pause. Reliable cars those, Hugh said generously. Then Vera pivoted to friends. She talked about a couple whose daughter had just made partner at a law firm in Houston. She talked about a family whose son had been tapped for a board position before 30. She talked about a woman from her book club who had married into, and here she used the phrase, a very well-situated family. I watched her. She was building something, brick by brick. A picture of a world where people were measured by their positions and properties and partners, and she was checking, quietly, whether I fit inside the frame. Owen was deflecting where he could, steering conversations, topping off glasses, asking his sister about her exam prep. I could feel him working to manage the temperature of the room. I let him. I just sat and listened and smiled and answered questions honestly and briefly, and I let Vera draw her conclusions. After lunch, Vera offered to show me around the property. Owen started to come with us, but she waved him off in a way that was friendly and final. Just us girls. We walked through the garden. She talked about the rose bushes, which had been planted by her mother-in-law. She talked about the history of the house. And then, smoothly, she said, You know, Adele, I want to be honest with you, because I think that's more respectful than dancing around things. I appreciate that, I said. Owen is at a point in his life where the direction he chooses matters enormously, she said. His father and I have worked very hard to build something for this family. We want Owen's life to reflect that. His partner is part of that picture. She paused, looking at the roses. I don't mean to be unkind. You seem like a lovely person. But I want to make sure you understand the kind of life Owen comes from and whether that's something you're prepared for. I looked at her for a moment. Do you mean financially? She smiled, a careful smile. I mean, in every sense. I see, I said. I only bring it up, she continued, because sometimes people come into situations without fully understanding what they're stepping into. Owen is generous. He wouldn't want you to feel out of your depth later down the line. She touched a rosebud gently, not looking at me. It's nothing personal. I just care about his happiness. I nodded slowly. That's very considerate of you. She seemed pleased by that. She moved on to the history of the cedar trees. That evening, dinner was more formal, the dining room, not the patio, flowers on the table. Hugh opened a bottle of something expensive and talked about it at some length. Vera had clearly told the housekeeper to set out the good china. I sat beside Owen, who kept finding small ways to touch my hand or my arm, small reassurances. I appreciated them. I didn't need them, but I appreciated them. Hugh spent dinner talking about a development project he'd been advising on, land outside Dallas, the kind of deal that moves hundreds of millions when it closes. He talked about connections, about who you needed to know to get things done, about the difference between people who understood how the world worked and people who didn't. I listened. I asked one or two questions about the risk assessment process, about how they were modeling the interest rate exposure on the construction financing. Hugh looked at me with mild surprise. You know about that? A little, I said. Vera redirected the conversation to a charity gala she was organizing. It was for a children's hospital, genuinely good work, I could tell she meant it, and she talked about the planning with obvious pride. Then she mentioned, almost as an aside, the per-plate cost and the names of the people on the host committee. Names she delivered like coordinates, points on a map that she wanted me to understand I didn't know how to read. Owen's sister Margot was watching me across the table. She had the careful attention of someone who had grown up in this house and learned to observe without appearing to. Once, when her mother was looking at her father, Margot caught my eye and gave me the smallest, driest smile. I liked her very much. After Vera refilled her wine, she turned to me with a smile that was softer now, almost kind. You know, Adele, I want you to know that Hugh and I are here for Owen's partners. We don't judge people for where they come from. She glanced at my sneakers, which I had not changed out of. We just want to make sure Owen ends up with someone who can really be present in his world. The events, the relationships, it takes a certain kind of person. Another pause. I know Austin is full of wonderful young people doing very good work in technology, but this world, a small gesture around the room, requires more than good intentions. I set down my fork. Not loudly, not dramatically. I just set it down and looked at her, and the table got a little quieter. Vera, I said, I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll take it the way I mean it, which is honestly. She tilted her head, the gracious hostess receiving input. When you talk about Owen needing a partner who fits his world, what does that mean to you, specifically? She started to answer with something smooth, but I continued gently. Because I want to make sure I understand what you're measuring, since that seems like it matters here. I folded my hands on the table. I'm the senior data scientist and team lead at Meridian Analytics. We model credit and market risk for institutional portfolios. I manage $200 million in assets. I have 7 direct reports, and my compensation package last year was just under $300,000. I said it quietly, the way you say something that doesn't need volume to land. I drive an old Civic because I don't care about cars. I rent because I've been deciding whether Austin is where I want to buy, and I don't make financial commitments I'm not certain about. I picked up my fork. I don't say any of this to be impressive. I say it because I'd like to know whether that changes the conversation, and if it does, I think we should both notice what that means. The table was very quiet. Hugh cleared his throat. Margot was looking at the tablecloth with the expression of someone trying not to smile. Owen's hand found mine under the table and held it. Vera's composure held. but only just. The color in her face shifted. Well, she said. I wasn't trying to imply. I know, I said. You were being protective of your son? I understand that completely. I just wanted to make sure we were talking to each other honestly, the way you said you preferred. Owen squeezed my hand. When I glanced at him, his eyes were bright. Not with surprise exactly, but with something I recognized as relief. The relief of watching someone refuse to be made smaller. Hugh recovered first, as men like him usually do. He asked me something about Meridian's approach to the current rate environment, a real question this time, and we talked about it for 20 minutes. Vera was quieter for the rest of the evening, but not coldly, thoughtfully, like she was recalibrating something. When Owen and I were in the guest room later, he sat on the edge of the bed and looked at me for a long moment. You knew this was coming, he said. I thought I might. Why didn't you tell me you were going to say something? Because I didn't know if I was going to, I said. I was waiting to see if it was necessary. He was quiet. Then, I should have said something earlier, before it got to that point. Owen. No, I mean it. I sat there and let her. He stopped, pressed his hands together. I've been doing that my whole life, staying quiet to keep the peace and not thinking about what it costs other people. He looked up. I'm sorry. I sat down beside him. I'm not angry. I know. That's almost worse. He almost smiled. You just handled it without me. I've been handling things without backup for a long time, I said. It's not a criticism, it's just true. I leaned against his shoulder. But I need you to know, going forward, that I'm not asking you to fight your family for me. I'm asking you to be honest, with them and with me. I can do that, he said quietly. I should have been doing that already. We sat there for a while. Outside, a mockingbird was singing in the cedar trees, going through its whole repertoire the way they do. Ridiculous, persistent, completely unbothered. The next morning I woke up early and went downstairs. Vera was already in the kitchen. The housekeeper wasn't in yet. She was standing at the counter in a bathrobe, making coffee the old-fashioned way, a pour-over, her silver hair loose. She looked like a different person without the polish. She heard me on the stairs and turned, and there was a flicker of something. Not quite embarrassment, but close to it. I didn't hear you get up, she said. I'm an early riser. I nodded toward the coffee. Need help? She paused. Then, sure. There are mugs in the cabinet above the pot. We made coffee together in silence for a few minutes. Then she said, without preamble, I owe you an apology. I looked at her. Last night I was condescending. I do that. She poured water slowly over the grounds, watching it bloom. Hugh and I have been worried about Owen for years. He gives himself to people. Completely. And I've watched it cost him more than once. She set the kettle down. So I do this thing where I evaluate, I protect. I forget that I'm not the only one in the room with something at stake. She looked at me directly for the first time without any performance behind it. You clearly love him. And you're not someone who needs protecting from the world. I should have seen that earlier. You're not wrong to care about him, I said. No. But there are better ways to show it. She poured 2 mugs and pushed one toward me. I also want to say, I've been in rooms full of successful women my entire adult life and I still managed to size you up by your shoes. That's embarrassing. I picked up the mug. Thank you for saying it. Thank you for not walking out. We stood at the kitchen window and drank our coffee and watched the backyard come into its morning light. The cedar trees going from gray to green. A cardinal landing on the fence and then leaving again. It wasn't a transformation exactly, not one morning's worth of coffee. But it was something honest. And that counted for more than she knew. When Owen came downstairs and found us talking at the kitchen table, really talking, his mother asking me about the models we build at Meridian, me asking her genuine questions about the hospital gala, the look on his face was something I will carry for a long time. Disbelief slowly becoming something softer. Something like hope. Hugh came in and joined us, and he was different too. Less performing, more present. He asked smart questions. I gave him real answers. Margot came down last and immediately read the room, caught my eye, and mouthed 2 words across the table that I will not repeat, but that made me press my lips together very hard to keep from laughing. We left Sunday afternoon. The goodbye on the porch was warmer than the hello. Vera hugged me, not the practice kind, the real kind, and said quietly, "Come back soon." Hugh shook my hand and said he'd send me an article about rate corridor modeling he thought I'd find interesting. He did, actually, 2 days later. It was a good article. In the car on the way home, Owen drove with one hand on the wheel and one hand holding mine across the console. The radio was on low. Austin spread out in front of us, familiar and unhurried in the Sunday afternoon light. "Thank you," he said eventually. "For what?" "For not being what they expected, and for not making them feel terrible about it." I looked out the window. A kid on a bike. A food truck opening for the evening rush. The ordinary, beautiful specificity of a city I'd built a life in, brick by brick, year by year, without anyone handing me anything. "I grew up learning that people can surprise you," I said, "if you give them room to." He lifted my hand and kissed my knuckles, which he'd never done before, which made me feel something warm and complicated in my chest. A few weeks later, Vera called me directly for the first time. She wanted advice on the financial structure of a non-profit she was trying to set up, a scholarship fund for first-generation college students in the Dallas area. She wanted it done right. I spent 45 minutes on the phone with her, walking her through the options. She took notes. She asked good questions. At the end she said, "You know, I think I've been confusing status for substance my whole life. It's a relief to talk to someone who knows the difference." I thought about my mother, who hung her associate's degree in the kitchen because she was proud of it. I thought about my dad, who knew every rest stop from Lubbock to El Paso by name. I thought about the first time I walked into a boardroom where everyone assumed I was someone's assistant, and how I sat down at the head of the table anyway. "It takes practice," I told her, "but you're getting there. Some things don't require a grand confrontation to change. Sometimes it just takes one honest weekend, one early morning kitchen, 2 cups of coffee, and the willingness to be seen for exactly who you are, not who someone else needed you to be." I still drive the Civic. I still wear those sneakers. And every time I walk into a room and someone glances at my shoes before they look at my face, I think of Vera, standing at her kitchen window in her bathrobe, watching the cardinals come and go, learning to see again. I keep thinking about the cardinal. The one that landed on Vera's fence that Sunday morning and left again without caring whether anyone was watching. There's something in that I'm still turning over. I didn't walk into that Westlake house to prove anything. That matters to me because I've met people who live to collect those moments. The reveal. The look on someone's face when the numbers land. That's not who I want to be. What I wanted, if I'm honest, was simpler and harder than that. I wanted to know whether the people Owen loved were capable of seeing a person clearly. Not the salary, not the job title. The person. The thing is, how we treat people when we think they can't do anything for us. That's not a small thing, that's the whole thing. My mother figured that out, working a front desk in Lubbock for 20 years. She watched people walk in and rearrange their entire behavior depending on whether the person across the counter had a title or a clipboard. She taught me to notice that, to file it away, to let it tell me what I needed to know. Vera was measuring me. I understood that. What I didn't know, sitting across from her at that dinner table, was whether she had the honesty to face herself when the measurement came back wrong. That took something, real character, the kind that doesn't come from money or breeding or knowing the right people. It comes from being willing to look at your own behavior and say, plainly, I was wrong about that. When she did it, standing in her kitchen, in a bathrobe with her hair loose, it changed something between us. Not everything, but something real. Owen took longer, and I think that's the part that actually mattered most. He'd spent 34 years learning to stay quiet to keep the peace, and that habit had calcified into something he didn't even notice anymore. What he had to find, what nobody can find for you, was the willingness to use his own judgment, to look at a situation and decide what he actually believed, not what would cause the least friction. That takes a kind of mental toughness that I don't think his parents ever asked of him, because it was easier not to. When he finally said the things he needed to say to them in that room after I left, I think he surprised himself more than anyone. And me. I had to stay honest about my own part in this. I chose to let them form assumptions. I could have said, early on, here's what I do, here's how I live, take it or leave it. Instead, I watched, I tested. I'm not sure that was entirely fair. What I'm sure of is that it taught me something about myself. That I still carry this old scar from 100 rooms where I walked in and got sized up before I opened my mouth, and sometimes I handle that by needing to prove it, quietly, on my own terms. I'm working on that. I think the version of me that can just walk in and be Adele without the experiment. That's the version I'm becoming. Some things only get better the slow way. Not through a single confrontation. Not through anyone being dramatically humbled. Through one honest morning in a kitchen. Through a phone call 3 weeks later. Through showing up for each other. Imperfectly, with increasing willingness to try. I still drive the Civic. I still wear the sneakers. And I'm starting to think that's not a statement anymore. It's just who I am.